Hi, and welcome to Ruck On, the rugby show brought to you by Wisp Sports. My name is Maria Sampson. I'm a former Canadian international, having won the silver medal at the 2014 Women's Rugby World Cup. We're going to be covering the lead up to the Women's Rugby World Cup that's going to be held in Ireland in 2017 next August. The podcast will be sharing with you various analysis, some inside scoop, and the various results and upcoming fixtures that will be happening throughout the end of 2016 as well as 2017. On today's show, we're going to be talking to you about the Olympics and the post-sevens buzz, the 15s internationals that have occurred thus far in 2016, as well as the November internationals and the packed schedule that we have all around the world for women's rugby. We're also going to be talking about the women's qualifying method for the Women's Rugby World Cup and the draw that's going to be taking place in November. Now let's get on with the show. The post-Olympic sevens buzz. There really wasn't too many surprises on the women's side when you started looking at the sevens game. As predicted, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and Great Britain ended in the 1 to 4 spots. And part of that was surprising because you expect a lot of surprises in sevens. However, from a general public point of view, I think what people didn't expect was the amount of excitement there was in the women's game. I had so many different coworkers and people who generally hadn't seen a lot of sevens rugby telling me how exciting the sevens games was. And for those of you who are going to be watching 15s for the first time over the next year, I can guarantee that 15s is just as exciting. One of the things that's happened in the post-Olympics is our sevens players going to be crossing over to the 15s code to take a run at the 2017 Rugby World Cup trophy. New Zealand and England have made it very clear that they support their athletes in both codes, but not so clear when you look at some of the other top teams, in particular, my country, Canada. There's been a little bit in the media about players who want to go play in 15s and then are getting cut on their sevens funding. So that's, more to be seen on that front. Australia 15s program has said they would welcome the sevens players over. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think you would just want the best rugby players, bar none, playing for the best trophy of that year. I think it's so important for 15s to maintain its place in the global game. Sevens is very much a smaller type of athlete, faster type of athlete, which makes the games very exciting for a 14-minute period. But in a 15s game, it's a game for absolutely everyone. It's accepting of all shapes and sizes, and it can be played from a very young age all the way up to Masters Division, into a touch league, and so forth. You have people who are playing, a very famous lady out in Nova Scotia who played well into her 70s, the full contact version, which is why I have a special place for this podcast in the lead up to our World Cup next year in Ireland. One thing that we need to talk about is what's happened so far in 2016. In 2016, so far, there's been 3 major things that have happened in the women's game. There's been the Six Nations over in Europe and Great Britain, as well as the Super Series here in North America. And then there's been a 2-game qualifier or a 2-game series between New Zealand and Australia. If we start talking about the Six Nations, France is very, very strong right now. They won the Six Nations by beating England in the decider game after a close loss to Wales. England, previously to that, had won the Grand Slam 2006 to 2012. They won the Grand Slam, which is winning all the games in the Six Nations, all but once during that time frame. Since 2012, though, there's been a split between Ireland and France. They've basically been going back and forth for the last 4 years, and Ireland has really taken off. I expect Ireland to do very well in the World Cup, especially as hosts. During the summer in the Super Series, U.S., Canada, France, and England faced off down in the USA, and Canada, I think, was a surprise favorite at the end of the day when they went 3-0, taking over England, the USA, and France. The biggest margin being over England, 52-17 in their first game. I think that was a real shocker to the public, and it really sent a message about how fast of a game that Canada can play, especially against England, who's been one of their biggest rivals over the last 5-year period. England finished second during that Super Series, France finishing third, and USA unfortunately came home with the wooden spoon, although you can never count them out. They have incredible athletes in all different sports, and they've really done a good job about attracting the best players across the country, especially through their Women's Premier League, which is going to be down in Georgia in mid-November. New Zealand and Australia had a 2-game series. Australia really hasn't been on the 15 scene recently. And so this 2-game series back in October was a huge chance for them to essentially be able to test new players. They had 13 first caps in their first game against New Zealand, which was held on October 22nd. Unfortunately, Australia took the loss 67-3. What was surprising, though, was the second game, Australia only lost by a margin of 29-3. They basically reduced the margin by 40 points from one game to the next. On the New Zealand side, the Black Ferns only had 3 changes from one starting 15 to the other, while the Wallaroos had 8 changes from one game to the other. The Wallaroos, because they had so many new players in that first game, probably just had some opening jitters. They have some incredible athletes, and if they can get some other Sevens players on board, I'm sure that they'll have a good run into the 2017 World Cup. So what's next? The November internationals. This is where the real lead up to the 2017 World Cup really starts. There is going to be 6 top 5 clashes in November alone, which is actually huge. Normally, in past lead ups, there hasn't been that many games. But essentially, we have these countries who are going, traveling far, New Zealand and Canada, who are both going over to Europe, as well as the USA, headed to France. And they're getting a lot of games in a very short period of times. It gives an opportunity for teams to see where they stand, try out different combinations, especially with the quick turnaround. New Zealand and Canada, before their matchup, only have a 4-day turnaround between their games. So they really only have 3 days to prepare after having hard tests against England and Ireland previous to that. Canada, after their New Zealand game, they're only going to have a 3-day turnaround to England, and New Zealand will only have a 4-day turnaround to Ireland. That really means that there's going to be a huge amount of pressure to try different combinations and keep everybody healthy. We're going to be going with big squads. The women's players are going to be going with likely bigger squads to those nations, and those will be kind of the top games. France and USA are going to play a doubleheader, and they only have a 3-day turnaround in their doubleheader, which really just means 2 days between the games. They're going to play, they're going to have a rest day, they're going to have a pre-game day, and then they're going to be playing. So what kind of matchups are we looking at? Essentially, New Zealand and Canada are 1 and 2 right now. That people are going to have their eye on that matchup. The other game that's going to be in the spotlight is any game that Ireland plays, and that's because they're the hosts. They're going to be taking on England on November 13th, Canada on November 19th, and then taking on New Zealand on November 27th. They are doing a huge job of being able to lead up to their own World Cup, and last World Cup in 2014, they really surprised everyone by beating New Zealand in the pool play and essentially knocking them out of the semifinals. I am very excited to see what Ireland can do, especially because they have an exciting backline and play a quick style of rugby that's not usual of a Northern Hemisphere European team. What's next? The draw for the World Cup for 2017. Who's going? We have 7 teams from the 2014 tournament in France that have already qualified. England, Canada, France, Ireland, New Zealand, the USA, and Australia. From there, 2 more teams have qualified, Italy and Wales. They're the top 2 after the already qualified 6 Nations group. So there's some big qualifiers coming up now, and there's only 3 spots remaining. 1 spot will go to the winner between Spain, which is a European champ, and Scotland. They're playing a double-headed series, winner take all, November 19th and November 26th. 2 spots will then be remaining for the final repechage tournament between South Africa, Fiji, and then there'll be 2 other Asian teams that are going to be joining them. What's interesting about Fiji is they have really taken off with their 7 success, and now they have a lot of those athletes that are playing both codes and essentially playing an exciting style of rugby. They're a very hard-hitting team, and they won 37-10 over Papua New Guinea to get that spot in the repechage tournament. Once all those teams have been decided, and actually before that, on November 9th, the Women's Rugby World Cup pool draw. That's where the teams will be split into 3 pools, and the standings are very important. The way the women's conference works is you're going to have the best team from each pool going on to the semifinals in the Rugby World Cup, and then only one second place team. So if you have two very strong teams in one pool, they can really almost do a disservice to each other by knocking one or the other out. And that's what happened to Ireland and New Zealand back in 2014 when Ireland ended up knocking out New Zealand. And because Canada had tied England in our pool, we went on to the semifinals, essentially knocking out New Zealand for the first time in 4 years. They didn't make the final. If you want to know more about rugby, there's a WIS Sports special series on the history of rugby by Penny Hopkins. It's a 4-part series that examines the growth of the game in both formats. If you know nothing of rugby, I would highly recommend it. That's all for this episode of Ruck On, the rugby show, brought to you by WIS Sports. For more global women's sports coverage, go to wisports.com and follow us at WIS Sports on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Maria Sampson. Talk to you next month.